Walt Whitman was the man who revolutionized American poetry. He invented a whole new poetic form, and he opened up topics to a wide range that nobody else would touch.
Walt Whitman's formative years were characterized by both hardship and intellectual curiosity, a combination that profoundly influenced his later poetic vision. Born in 1819 in West Hills, Long Island, New York, Whitman grew up in a family of modest means. His father, Walter Sr., was a carpenter who frequently struggled financially, and his mother, Louisa, was a strong but nurturing figure of Dutch descent. Despite their lack of resources, the Whitman family placed great value on education, and young Walt was encouraged to develop his love for reading and writing. Although his formal schooling was limited, Whitman was a voracious reader, immersing himself in books from a young age. The works of Homer, Shakespeare, and the Bible shaped his worldview, as did his early exposure to the democratic ideas of the American Revolution. These formative influences instilled in him a deep respect for individuality, freedom, and the beauty of human nature, all of which would later become central themes in his poetry. Whitman's early career as a printer's apprentice and his subsequent jobs as a teacher and journalist also played a significant role in shaping his literary style and philosophical outlook. His work as a journalist, especially in New York City, exposed him to the diverse and rapidly changing social and political landscape of America. In the 1840s, Whitman worked for a variety of newspapers, honing his skills as a writer and editor. This experience helped him develop a direct, unadorned style of writing that would later become the hallmark of his poetry. Moreover, Whitman's work in journalism made him acutely aware of the pressing social issues of his time, including the fight for abolition, women's rights, and the rights of Native Americans. These issues would later inform much of his poetry, contributing to the powerful social commentary in his later works. The publication of Leaves of Grass and its radicalism. The first edition of Leaves of Grass, published in 1855, marked the birth of a new kind of American poetry, radically different from anything that had come before it. In its initial form, the book contained only 12 poems, but it set the tone for Whitman's lifelong poetic project. The creation of a distinctly American voice that would speak to the nation's ideals, struggles, and dreams. Unlike the highly structured and formal poetry that dominated American literary circles in the mid-19th century, Whitman's Leaves of Grass broke free from traditional poetic conventions. The collection used free verse, a style characterized by irregular meter and rhyme, and rejected formal stanzas in favor of more fluid, organic lines. Whitman's distinctive voice, bold and expansive, sought to reflect the vastness of America itself. The poet aimed to mirror the rhythms of nature and everyday life, which he believed were as diverse and complex as the people of the nation. The radicalism of Leaves of Grass was not just in its form, but in its content. Whitman celebrated the body, sexuality, and sensuality, topics that were considered taboo or inappropriate in mainstream 19th century American society. His poems often extolled the virtues of the human body, rejecting Victorian ideals of modesty and shame. This unabashed embrace of the body as a source of power and beauty was a defining feature of Whitman's work. Furthermore, Whitman's poetry explicitly rejected the hierarchical divisions of class, race, and gender that marked American society. By asserting that all people, regardless of their social standing, had an inherent dignity and worth, Whitman advocated for an egalitarian vision of democracy. The initial reception of Leaves of Grass was mixed, with some critics praising its innovative approach to poetry and others condemning it as crude or immoral. However, Whitman's conviction in his work was unwavering, and he revised and expanded Leaves of Grass throughout his life, reaffirming his commitment to a poetry of inclusivity, individuality, and freedom. The role of nature in Whitman's poetry. Nature plays a central and symbolic role in Walt Whitman's poetry, serving as both a literal and metaphorical backdrop for his exploration of human experience. Whitman's poems often draw inspiration from the natural landscape of America, which he saw as a reflection of the country's boundless potential and its diverse, democratic spirit. The vast American landscape, ranging from the open prairies and forests to the bustling cities and rivers, served as a constant source of inspiration for Whitman. He viewed nature as a reflection of the vitality and energy of the American people, and many of his poems seek to celebrate the connection between humanity and the natural world. In Song of Myself, Whitman writes about the grass, symbolizing the continuity of life and the shared experiences that unite all people. The poem asserts that every living being is part of a greater whole, with nature serving as the unifying force that ties all individuals together. Whitman's connection to nature went beyond mere description. It was a deeply spiritual and philosophical connection. He often used natural imagery to explore themes of transcendence and the interconnectedness of all things. For Whitman, the natural world was not separate from the human experience, but intimately linked to it. His poems reveal a deep reverence for nature, seeing it as a source of renewal, healing, and wisdom. In When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, Whitman contrasts the dry, intellectual study of the stars with the direct, intuitive experience of being in nature, where the beauty of the world can be felt rather than analyzed. Through such poems, Whitman emphasizes the importance of direct experience and personal connection to the world around us. In his poetry, nature is not just a passive backdrop, but a vibrant, living force that shapes and reflects the inner lives of individuals and the collective identity of the nation. Whitman's vision of democracy and equality. At the heart of Walt Whitman's poetry is a profound and unwavering belief in democracy and equality. Whitman saw democracy not just as a political system, but as a way of life, a system in which all individuals, regardless of their race, gender, or social status, could express their unique voices and contribute to the collective well-being of the nation. His vision of democracy was deeply rooted in the ideals of liberty, justice, and equality, and he sought to capture these values in his poetry. In Leaves of Grass, Whitman extols the virtues of the common man and celebrates the diversity of the American populace. He believed that every individual, no matter their background, had intrinsic value and the potential to contribute to the greater good. Through his poetry, Whitman sought to elevate the ordinary person, highlighting their humanity and dignity. His celebration of the individual was always tempered by a recognition of the interconnectedness of all people, emphasizing that the success of the nation depended on the well-being of all its citizens. Whitman's commitment to equality also extended to his progressive views on race, gender, and sexuality. While he was a white man living in an era when slavery was still legal and women's rights were severely restricted, his poetry often reflected an inclusive vision of society. Whitman was an outspoken abolitionist, and his poems, such as The Slave Singing at Midnight, expressed his deep empathy for the plight of enslaved African Americans. He also celebrated the experiences and contributions of women, a subject that was rarely addressed with such openness in the literature of his time. Moreover, Whitman's poems frequently engaged with themes of sexuality, embracing the body and sensuality in a way that was ahead of its time. His works were a challenge to the moral and social norms of 19th century America, advocating for a more inclusive, egalitarian, and compassionate society. Through his poetry, Whitman articulated a vision of democracy that embraced diversity, individuality, and the collective strength of the people. The Civil War and Whitman's transformation. The Civil War, which raged from 1861 to 1865, had a profound impact on Walt Whitman's life and poetry. During the war, Whitman was deeply moved by the loss of life and the brutal reality of the conflict. Though he was not a soldier himself, Whitman felt a strong personal connection to the war's devastating consequences. He moved to Washington, D.C. in 1862 and began visiting military hospitals, where he volunteered as a nurse. These experiences would leave an indelible mark on his writing, particularly in his portrayal of the war's psychological and physical toll on soldiers. In poems such as The Wound Dresser, Whitman captures the horror and trauma of war, recounting his time tending to wounded soldiers and offering them comfort in their suffering. The physical and emotional scars of war became central to Whitman's later poetry, and his experiences as a nurse gave him a deep sense of empathy for the pain and anguish of others. Whitman's wartime experiences also led to a transformation in his poetic voice. Before the war, his work had been characterized by a hopeful, expansive vision of democracy and individual freedom. But the war, with its immense loss and division, forced Whitman to confront the darker aspects of human nature and the nation's struggle for unity. In Drum Taps, 1865, a collection of poems written in response to the war, Whitman grapples with themes of sacrifice, death, and the devastating impact of violence. At the same time, he expresses a deep belief in the possibility of renewal and healing. Whitman's poems from this period reveal his belief that the nation, though scarred by war, could ultimately transcend its divisions and emerge stronger. The Civil War became, for Whitman, both a personal and poetic reckoning, a moment when he had to confront the complexities and contradictions of democracy and the profound costs of maintaining the ideals of freedom and equality. Whitman's lasting impact on American literature. Walt Whitman's influence on American literature is immeasurable. His innovative use of free verse and his focus on the individual voice, the body, and the American experience set him apart from other poets of his time and helped to redefine the possibilities of poetic expression. Whitman's work directly influenced the modernist movement, particularly poets like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and William Carlos Williams, who admired his ability to break free from traditional forms and experiment with language and structure. We hope that this journey through Whitman's life and poetry has inspired you to explore his work further, and perhaps find in his words a reflection of your own experiences and dreams. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.